Welcome to my final project presentation. I'm recording from Long Island, New York, and this project is titled Mystic Mockingbird. As you may have guessed, I'll be comparing Dennis Lehan's Mystic River and Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. Both are critically acclaimed literary works of fiction that we covered in class this semester. I chose these works because on the surface, To Kill a Mockingbird and Mystic River appear to be very different. Lehan's work is set in a modern working-class neighborhood in South Boston, while the setting of Lee's work is a small southern town in the 1930s. The fact that these two places are both within the United States is about all they have in common. Surface-level analysis doesn't highlight much common ground between these stories, but if you dig a little deeper, you can see that they actually have an incredible amount in common. To start, both stories center around fathers. Jimmy Marcus and Atticus share a preoccupation with justice, but their approaches to achieving that justice are very different. Atticus is a lawyer who studied and is dedicated to the formal justice system. He practices law ethically and responsibly and professionally. Jimmy is also focused on justice, but he does his work through the lens of a criminal and a vigilante. Atticus relies on formal justice to try to achieve what he thinks Tom Robinson needs. Atticus explains the purpose of his actions when he says, "I wanted you to see what real courage is, instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what." Jimmy distrusts the court systems entirely and has no respect for them. Instead, he takes matters into his own hands and tries to hunt down Katie's murderer with the help of his in-laws, the Savage brothers. When Jimmy mistakenly pegs Dave as Katie's murderer, Jimmy brings Dave to the Mystic River to deliver a self-imposed sentence. In this act, Jimmy assumes the role of jury, justice, and executioner. In Dave's final moments, Jimmy tells him, "We bury our sins here, Dave. We wash them clean." Harper Lee's Mockingbird motif is a really powerful metaphor for innocence corrupted. And I think that if we were to apply that idea to Mystic River, Dave, Brendan, and Katie would all be considered mockingbirds. Tom Robinson is the main mockingbird in To Kill a Mockingbird, and the story revolves around his wrongful persecution and conviction. In Mystic River, the story revolves around Katie's murder. In both cases, there is clear wrongful persecution. Tom Robinson was innocent, as proven by Atticus's thorough defense. But the racism rampant in Maycomb jeopardized his trial. Social justice overrode formal justice in the story. A similar thing happened in Mystic River, wherein Jimmy's emotional judgments and quick views overrode Dave's chances for survival. Atticus, like Sean Devine, tried to mitigate these forces of harmful judgment, but were eventually ineffectual in doing so. I've talked a bit about the context and characters in these stories, and now I'd like to transition into a conversation about the similar themes in these works. Protection of the innocents is one of the most fundamental aspects of overlap between these stories. Jimmy and Atticus were both faithfully committed to protecting the innocent victims who were threatened. Atticus takes on Tom Robinson's case even though he knows Tom doesn't stand a chance of receiving a fair trial in Maycomb. And Jimmy is laser focused on hunting down the person responsible for Katie's death. In both stories, the characters were pursuing senses of protection that they were never able to get. They know this, but they do it anyway. Tom is doomed the day the evils accuse him, and Katie is already dead. Protecting these characters is virtually impossible, yet Atticus and Jimmy devote themselves to this cause anyway. The theme of family is also evident in both stories. When Jimmy's first wife died and he was released from prison, he was terrified by the thought of caring for a 5-year-old Katie. He talks a lot in the book about the moment he was sitting in the kitchen with Katie, and Katie said she was hungry, and the overwhelming sense hit him that he was going to have to care for this girl every time she was hungry. From that moment on, Jimmy made a vow never to return to crime. He did this so he would never have to leave Katie again. He completely reinvented himself. He changed everything, and he stuck true to that oath up until Katie's death. I think Jimmy's vow to live straight died with Katie. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus takes on Tom's case, in part because he wants to teach his children an important lesson about life and justice. He has an untraditional relationship with Jem and Scout in a lot of ways. He has them call him by his first name, and he speaks to them throughout the story as if they were adults, often launching into these long-winded philosophical monologues that are way above the kids' heads. But he does all of this because he thinks it's the best way he can prepare them for the future and for the real world. He loved them deeply. Both fathers loved their children really deeply. That was clear in both stories. And he wanted to see them safe and morally sound, unlike the majority of Maycomb, who he thinks has succumbed to this groupthink mentality regarding racism and prejudice. Atticus acknowledges this when he tells Jem, "There's a lot of ugly things in this world, son. I wish I could keep them all away from you. That's never possible." The idea of good and evil is another common theme. Atticus tries to impress the importance of one's moral character on his children throughout the story. He faces harassment and violence at the hands of his neighbors because he chooses to stick up for what he believes is right. He describes personal conscience as being the only thing that doesn't succumb to majority rule. There's a subliminal conversation happening throughout the novel about the lack of goodness in Maycomb. When Tom is convicted and murdered, it seems like evil has won. But in the context of real life, and the lineage of study and praise that To Kill a Mockingbird has received, it's the town of Maycomb and its implied connection to racism in the American South that continues to stand trial. In Mystic River, the theme of good and evil is a major part of the story. As I mentioned earlier, I think Dave Boyle is a mockingbird. He was abducted and subjected to 4 days of brutal torture when he was just 11 years old. A big part of Dave died when this happened. Dave acknowledges this internally, which is why he privately refers to himself as the boy who escaped. The idea being, Dave is now something different, something new, something changed. His goodness was corrupted and something darker took its place. Jimmy's relationship to crime in his family is also symbolized through the good-bad theme. As a parent and a husband committed to his family, Jimmy lives out his good side. He is a business owner and a peaceful member of society. When the darkness of Katie's murder touches him, his capability for violence takes over. Jimmy always knew he had this in him. He acknowledged it himself and said it was something he got from his father. When Katie's gone, he leans into this shadow side in his pursuit of justice. Which brings me to my last point of comparison between these works, the theme of justice. Both Atticus and Jimmy chase justice throughout their respective stories, and both achieve a fractured justice by the end. Jimmy kills Dave, and even though he knows it was a mistake, he reasons it was probably a good thing, because sooner or later, Dave's true identity as a monster was bound to come out. Jimmy needs resolution around the concept of justice so badly that he talks himself into a murder, that he talks himself into being okay with a murder that he fundamentally doesn't believe in. In To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus's attempts to guide Tom towards justice fail. However, a similar compromise kind of justice was achieved when Sheriff Heck Tate steps in to protect Boo Radley from prosecution following Bob Ewell's death. Atticus doesn't agree with this, like Jimmy didn't agree with killing Dave once he knew the truth, but both men eventually accepted the justice they could when their original goals weren't achievable. Because of this, there is a shared submissiveness to the justices achieved in both works. Thank you for listening to my talk about these two awesome novels. I had a great time diving into the connections between these seemingly different works. And for a little extra fun, I've created an original crossword puzzle as part of this project, also titled Mystic Mockingbird, The crossword puzzle tests players' knowledge of Harper Lee and Dennis Lehan's timeless tales. It's been a really awesome semester. This class has challenged me in ways I was not expecting it to, so I really do appreciate that. And if you'll be there on Saturday, I'll see you at graduation.